Alright, this is Julian with Manning Auto. I am in my home garage right now. Something that I know a lot of people don't like doing on the ground, dropping a gas tank, but it is possible. You just gotta jerry-rig a couple things. I gotta replace a fuel pressure sensor, and there is no access on top. The bed is way too rusty to pull off, so we're gonna drop the tank and get that sensor. While we're up there, we're also going to do the vent solenoid. Intermittently, it was not closing when it's supposed to, or not opening when it's supposed to. So we're going to do that. And yeah, I've been having a lot of fun on this. As you can see, it's not rusty at all. Definitely did not have to cut the strap because the bolt broke inside. It's okay, we'll fix it. Alright, so fuel tank is down. Again, how to jerry rig something. This is a full tank of gas. I'm not going to waste time trying to empty it into something else. It's just not necessary. So right here is the sensor I'm replacing. That's a fuel pressure sensor, and then the vent solenoid. Well, it's kind of hard to see. Right there. Barely see it. It's rusty, crusty. But, yep, that's where we're at so far. Alright, so it is the next day, and this has turned into a whole lot more than I was wanting. Usually happens when I'm working on old rusty trucks. It's always something else. So I got the fuel pressure sensor on, and then I checked the sensor readings with the scan tool, and now they were reading good. Before, it was reading like -16 vacuum, which is not good. It should be between -1 and 1. So there was something wrong with the sensor, because I put the new one on and it was reading like about 1. So I fixed that, and I put the vent valve on. Got it all put back together. Went to start it, and it started up, and then boom, 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 died. So I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. It's gonna be one of those. So I get my fuel pressure gauge out. I got a pretty nice one, luckily, from Snap-on. It's got all the adapters you would need. So I got the gauge out, hooked it up there at the test port, and with the fuel pump commanded on, I was getting about 55 psi pressure, which is within specs. So, I thought, okay, well, the fuel pump can't be bad, right? I mean, there's fuel pressure at the rail. So I went to crank it while watching the gauge, and it was staying right around that zone, 55 to 60 psi, but it still wouldn't start. So, I leave the gauge connected to it for a while to see if maybe something was leaking internally, if maybe the fuel pressure regulator was faulty, but it held pressure for 30-45 minutes, so there's no leak down anywhere. So that rules out fuel injectors. That rules out, well, it doesn't rule out fuel injectors, but it rules out the fuel injectors leaking. It rules out the fuel pressure regulator leaking back down to the fuel tank. So it's kind of at a standstill, And And I'm just kind of thinking through it, like, what the heck could be wrong with this thing? It's obviously a fuel problem. It's obviously a fuel delivery problem. But we're good at the rail when we command the pump on. So I'm kind of taking a wild guess right now. And, maybe this is what most people guess to begin with, but a lot of times if you just guess fuel pump right off the bat, you throw a fuel pump in and it still don't start. I hate when that stuff happens. And if I can't prove something, I don't like to replace it. And with the fuel pressure sensor, I could prove that was wrong. With the vent valve, I could prove that was wrong. But the fuel pump, I just cannot prove to be wrong. But I've ruled out basically everything else. So you can get a fuel pump relatively cheap for this car. It's about $80. And then I pull it out, again, now I have to drop the tank a second time. But luckily I had gotten new straps and bolts, so it wasn't as much of a headache. Also, the customer, he's actually my father-in-law. He said the car died after he filled up the tank, and he was driving for about 20 minutes, and then it stalled out on him. So, I checked the fuel, I emptied all the fuel out, and I even tried putting in some new fuel, and that obviously didn't make any difference. A lot of people would say, oh, the purge valve's bad. No, I tested that. It turns on and off when commanded. It's not stuck open. So, not the purge valve. And so it's not the purge valve, it's not bad gas, it's not the vent valve, it's not the pressure sensor. I guess there's a slight itty-bitty chance it's the fuel pressure regulator, but I really doubt it. So at this point, I pretty much ruled out everything. And I can't prove that it's a fuel pump, but by process of elimination, it has to be the fuel pump. And if it's not, you're going to see more of this video. And you're going to see me a lot more frustrated probably. But, working on cars is like that sometimes. You think you know what's wrong with it, and all your tests say, yes, this is what's wrong with it. And then you do the fix, and it doesn't fix it. That just happens sometimes. That's a part of the trade. And it can be frustrating, but, it's challenges like this that kind of hone in your diagnostic skills, and it just makes you a better tech. So, yeah, I was a little frustrated when what I did at first didn't work, but now I've got the fuel tank out again, and just look at, I'll tell you what, getting this locking ring off was no joke. Thing is so rusty. I ordered a new one of those. And it was even harder because I lost my regular sledgehammer, so I was using this just little nail hammer. But it came off. I got it. And so we got it all cleaned up now. So now it's going to be a third day tomorrow working on this because I got to wait on the locking ring. But yeah, I'll be back tomorrow with the rest of the video and hopefully the truck running. All right, so it's been, I don't even know. This is a couple days after the last part of the video. So I ended up putting the fuel pump in and getting it all back together. And what do you know? It didn't start. Crank, nothing. So a lot of times when stuff like this happens, I look back and think about what the customer had said as far as like the initial cause of concern. And most of the times, if I've replaced a few things that I thought was wrong and it made no change at all, it's usually because I based it off of what the customer said. Now, a lot of times what the customer says does have to do with the issue. But there are some cases like this one where it's completely unrelated. And that's when you get really frustrated and waste a lot of time. And that's exactly what happened here. So I start back at square one because I'm like, okay, there's no way there's a fuel problem. There's just no way. All the tests I've done, it has a new fuel pump. All the pressures are good when they're supposed to be. This cannot be a fuel problem. So I start at square one, which is where I actually should have started to begin with. And, you go through the checklist. How do I get this engine to start? You need good battery voltage. You need good ground. You need fuel, which we know we have. You need compression, which I could tell the engine had compression just by the sound of it cranking. You need air, and you need spark. So, quickest thing, easiest thing usually check is spark. So I pull the number one spark plug out, ground it so I can see if it sparks, and what do you know? There's no spark at all, not even a little weak spark. So I'm like, great, what is the problem? So I unplug the ignition coil harness, and first thing you always test is your ground. And I test the ground, and what do you know? I have 24 kiloohms of resistance. Now, anybody who knows anything about electrical, on a ground circuit, you want like less than 2 ohms most of the time. Pretty much as close to 0 as possible. So this one had 24 kiloohms, so it was way above where it should have been. So now I'm ripping apart harnesses, unplugging end to end, trying to figure out where this thing's broken or where it's corroded or something, because something's off on the circuit for the ground. And I tear apart a bunch of the harness. I don't see anything too obvious. So then I go and find the other end of the circuit, which is a ground on the left side lower of the engine, which is actually the same spot where the battery grounds. So I pull off that bolt. It's a tiny little wire that grounds all these ignition coils, and I pull it off, and I give it the tiniest little pull, and it breaks right off. So I strip it down, and I test the wire end to end, and with that off, it was good. I had 0.2 ohms of resistance. So I'm like, there's no way I just wasted all this time over this one little itty bitty wire. So I put a new terminal on it, hooked it all back up, bam, cranked right up like nothing ever happened. So that was relieving. You go through a lot of frustration like that sometimes when you're trying to figure out different problems on cars. But as long as you don't quit and you have some idea of what you're doing, you can usually figure it out. So, this is one of those times where it's another lesson learned. Consider what the customer says as the related problem or what happened, but don't only base your diagnosis on that, because sometimes other stuff just happens randomly and has nothing to do with what the customer was doing at the time of failure. And that was this case. This customer had just filled up their gas tank, drove for 20 minutes, and then the car died out. The truck died out completely, and then he couldn't get it started back up. So that whole time, I'm just thinking, fuel, it's gotta be fuel. But it had nothing to do with that. It was just a little itty bitty wire that was super old and just barely hanging on by a thread, and it finally just gave up and wasn't enough to ground all the ignition coils. So, yeah, that was definitely frustrating, but also at the end of it, joyful. I'm glad I got it figured out. They were obviously happy their truck was running, and now it's out of my hair for now. So I didn't record all that because, in the midst of all that, it's so frustrating. The last thing I want to do is pick up this phone and talk about it. But yeah, we got it solved. It is running, and it's all good. Thanks for watching.